bottle calf, and he's grown into be a pretty nice bull. So now she's breeding that back with the jerseys we bought.
I'll bring you a milking stool.
We have, yeah, we have one. It's It's awesome.
I found our old bucket milkers. We was cleaning out the garage. I found our old bucket milkers
yeah.
that we used. You know, I don't have the lid for them or the tit cups and stuff.
Ready?
But
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Did everybody see the copies of the minutes that were circulating?
Yes.
Have Pete.
No, that's who we want to see.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Who seconded?
Oh,
Okay.
Jason
Jim, I
did.
don't care.
Jason did.
All in favor? Okay. Today we are discussing our recommendations. So I think probably the best way would be look at all the different recommendations, unique items, discuss whether we want them on or off, and just how the wording, which the ones that are similar, what wording do we like best, how do we want to present it? Did anybody else bring a list of recommendations beyond?
I wrote them down.
Here.
But I didn't
But you didn't bring them?
No.
Well, yeah, I wrote them down, but I didn't get a chance to make copies.
Okay.
You probably couldn't read my writing anyway. But from what I read, it's pretty much same.
Let's just start with the first paragraph, which all of these that we have are pretty similar. It's the purpose of zoning. Or what the vision or goal of what it would look like is. One list is basically the same thing that we had on our forum presentations. Where we had about 5 specific bullet points. Do we prefer that format or just the paragraph? There's a couple of different wordings on paragraphs that aren't quite as specific, but says basically on the same thing.
All of them say pretty much the same thing. Just worded different.
Yeah, I don't know that I had a. I don't know that I have a preference. I think that if we provide, like, the bullet pointed list is, I think, all encompassing of what I think we as a committee envision the purpose of zoning to be.
I think that's pretty much what we had talked about last week on the bullet points that Mary has on hers. Is pretty much what we had covered.
Okay.
So I think, how do you want to present it? Do you want it as a, like, I think that's the question. Do we want it as like a letter or
Yeah,
just
I
like
guess that is the question.
a list of bullet points on what we found?
I kinda like the way, I think you got this one, didn't you? I kinda like the way this one's laid out.
It's kind of a mix of both,
Ryan had.
letter and bullet points.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I just tried to write it as a letter, but with like, hey, here's our recommendations, and here's our findings about why we made these recommendations. Here's some ways we can address community concern, or recommendations for, that we can address community concerns. But it is by no means complete. It's missing, obviously, a lot of information, or not a lot, but it's missing some key points.
I would say, why don't we use that one as our, we look at this one as our initial draft, and then we just, what do we want to add, what do we want to take out, what do we want to modify?
Kinda what I was thinking too.
Yeah,
I mean,
I like the start of that.
it's pretty much got a good start on it.
The next thing I noticed then is the proposed zoning types. And we just have agricultural, commercial, and industrial, and not the transitional residence.
I have
Do you
no
think-
issue. I have no issue with including it. We had talked. I didn't put it in there because we had talked about not having it, and
kinda
it's
went
kind of went
back
back
and
and
forth with
forth.
that.
So that's why I didn't. But I guess it. Maybe what we could do is put in there, like, these are the ones we think should definitely be investigated and included. It may be worthwhile looking at a transitional one as more information is available, or
Just
whatever.
Maybe in talking with the different towns, that it would,
Give them the
Yeah,
option. I
when-
mean,
yeah, do they want to, I mean, it would be under the counties, not under the cities.
right.
So like the 3 mile zone that everybody talks about around Fort Scott is no longer. And do they feel the need to have a transitional area, or just let it be agriculture? And go from there.
Yeah.
I like that idea, it's just leaving it
Yeah,
as
I like,
something to consider, but you need to talk to the other people involved and.
I mean, maybe we put in parenthesis after types, any other, some way to explain that these are the three that we think are necessary, and then any additional that they see fit is, it's not an all-encompassing list. That's essentially what we're not saying just three. These are the three most important, and then any additional. I don't know how to.
Yeah, I think that what I struggled with, when I was going through this, writing it up, is providing, I mean, it seems like we all kind of have the same idea looking at all this stuff, is providing our findings and our recommendations and kind of what we have come across, without getting explicit on this is what just because we talked about this last time, we just don't have the time.
Right.
We didn't have the time to go through and make explicit recommendations on things. So it's like everything's noted with a caveat, like we should maybe investigate more. There could be a potential to add more zoning types if the need arises or if from further investigation.
This is a starting point
Yeah, I think
for the,
I think the important thing is to be clear about what the resistance to it, and like some of the challenges that we've all come across with talking to people, that these are there's probably certainly other things out there that we haven't had a chance to think about, and as the committee comes together, but this is so far what we have found. It should definitely be addressed in some way, and you should think about all these things as you're going in to implement however they write the zoning. So one of the things that I struggled with was how to discuss what we talked about with agriculture. Like what I have listed here is that it would have no restrictions or requirements for land use except for those defined in what I have listed as C1 and I1. I don't know if that's I don't know if that's the right language to use there. Jason, I think you have something in here.
Yeah. My fourth paragraph down, ag land needs to be zoned such that uses outside ag, personal residence, personal use, or small local businesses would be conditional use. Anything commercial above a defined threshold or industrial would need to be approved.
Yeah, and I think Mary, you had something similar in yours, I thought. Maybe. Sorry, go ahead.
I think if we change my wording just a little bit, saying the primary use for ag lands would be for ag, personal residence, personal use, local small business. The cases that would require conditional use would be commercial above a defined threshold and industrial.
Yeah.
So that we're not saying definitively you should limit the case uses, but we're saying this is the primary use: ag, personal residence, personal use, local small business, and then these are the things we think you should definitely have as conditional uses would be commercial and above a certain threshold and industrial.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would be moderate to heavy in commercial and then all industrial. I mean, I can't think of a small industrial type situation where we'd want a threshold below a certain amount.
I think it depends on how we define industrial. But yeah, I think would a small machine shop be industrial or commercial?
It's a small machine shop would be commercial because you're dealing with customers. You're machining things. Now, if the machine shop was doing wholesale type things, then could be industrial, kind of in between.
so it was turning out product, so many employees turning out product.
Yeah, maybe
the industrial side.
Maybe we just I think so maybe it's worded in the way that's, like your first sentence, I think, or the first part of that sentence, ag land would be zoned such that any uses outside of ag. So I think the outside is obviously critical, because the first time I read it, I was like, wait, personal, anyway, so outside ag, personal residence, personal use, or small local businesses. And then I think we could be like, as to, like, Mary, you had some, I'm not gonna get the language right now, but you have,
Yeah,
zoning
list
change
of
requests would
different
be,
things that we talked about.
yeah,
Mhm.
anything else beyond, or anything that's defined in large commercial or large industrial, you'd have to get a zoning change or conditional use
Mhm.
permit for. So, which I think is maybe, so maybe we just take, yeah, maybe it says something like, it is the recommendation of this committee to begin by zoning the entire committee as A1. I'll have to think about it, but I think you can combine that with your first sentence, and then, I don't know, I think we could combine those thoughts.
I do like my last sentence there because it's a very firm that they need to carefully consider what defines that threshold of non-large and large, you know.
Yeah, I think I had something in there about that in there somewhere. If not, I intended to, because I think that I do agree with you. I think it's super critical that we don't. And Mary, you had something in there as well about not, yeah, your first real paragraph. As business friendly as possible, do no harm to small businesses, encourage growth. Yeah, mine's the last. Zoning must be business friendly. There should be strong measures taken to show that we are not anti-business in this county. We want to encourage businesses to come and grow. Yeah.
Am I missing it in yours? Maybe in both of them, about special use, what we had discussed about the difference between a special use and a conditional use, and the temporary.
In my very last one, I have temporary events.
Oh, okay, yeah, I see.
I don't, my thought on that is that they should be encouraged, and that zoning shouldn't have an impact on those, and you had something in here that was a little bit more specific, I think.
Yeah, mine's the second paragraph of the second page.
So are you saying that you think that we should have a special use permit for any temporary commercial use?
Yes. For the, well, it could be defined by size or something too, but
Would help your, it would help your other residents out at that area, especially if, if it's on gravel where the event maybe had to provide dust control or traffic management or something like that. When it's down to the planning commission, you could come there, they would have to provide something there for dust control or event,
Yeah.
in the planning side of it.
The only concern I have with some of that is that I wouldn't want to discourage an event from taking place by it.
And that's for safety only. I mean, you'd have to do something for that as safety wise only.
Yeah. I,
I don't think it would be discouraging if you was to present it that way.
Yeah, that's kind of what I had in mind.
Yeah, is there,
I think there needs to be a size limit on that. I think it needs to be a special use permit on temporary events that has attendance of this much. Because like, if there's like a fishing derby somewhere that's small, you don't wanna have to get a special permit for that.
yeah,
But if you had something where it involved 500 people,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
going to be
yeah,
at it.
that-
Then safety concerns, just safety.
Well,
period.
yeah,
sure.
Where you have traffic, whatever, going to that event, you're gonna have to either provide security or some type of traffic control, which is done most of the time on those big events in Kansas City by volunteers to manage it. It's just safety concerns.
Is there anything already in place for anything like that in the county for county ordinance wise?
For what?
Large events? Like
Like
special use
temporary.
permits, like temporary, like the circus coming to outside the, you know?
No, I'm not for sure, because I have not done this yet for this year, but.
They have the Fort
Like
Fest
the
every
fair,
year
the
with
county
a
fair
huge
board.
success at the Fort Fest. And I think the first time that it was held out on Maple Road. And I think traffic was a concern, but where they have it down here now at the frontage park, I believe is where they have the Fort Fest at. And, of course, you've got the city to help out with that here in town
Yeah.
and stuff. But if you get outside of town, you won't have that unless the organizer of the event provides it, puts it on, whatever. And it's like I said, it's just a safety concern to me.
yeah.
I think on events like that, they would just come straight to the board or commission if they needed something. I mean, like, if it was on somebody's private property, I wouldn't see it being a zoning issue for a temporary, event or something like that.
What
I
if they
don't
don't come to the,
Uh,
what if they don't come to the commission?
well,
Then they just
then,
have
you
it.
know. I mean, it's kind of like the old parties out at the lake. I mean, the
Yeah,
sheriff's
that's different.
department
That's
shows up.
different, though. It's
Yeah.
different if you have, and it's different if you have an event out in the county and you have 200 or 300 cars a day for 2 or 3 days going up and down a road that has 20 cars a day on it, and then that traffic increases.
Yeah, I think you
You've
just-
gotta be some dust control for the people that live on the road. There's gotta be extra where they have to go and maybe get the sheriff or whatever to kind of, and patrol that road or set up something for that.
I think we're getting more into county ordinance type
Yeah, I
territory
think-
there
I think-
rather than zoning.
I would tend to agree with that, yeah.
I'll tell you let's see.
It can go both ways.
No, and I totally understand and respect why it's in there, and the concerns. What I said about my concern would be that it doesn't get approved in a timely way, and so then it doesn't happen, and that's a detriment to this community because of all the people that
Usually,
might come in.
most of that stuff though, I mean, instantly gets approved when you watch the city stuff. I mean, boom, it's like that. Just everything that happens in town, just
I'd say more or less it's gonna be like, if you're saying with increased traffic or something like that, so people that live in that area are probably gonna call, the dispatch, and deputies are gonna get dispatched out there. But as far as pre-planning for it, I don't see where that would be a necessity unless.
Maybe it's something that we put it like we.
Wait for it to happen.
And all of it will fall back on the
Well, I
big
think,
promoters, let's say whoever's putting it on, promoter,
Yeah.
a lot of it falls back on their insurance too.
so the example you're talking about is that motocross thing that they did.
Yeah, the Red Bull.
yeah, that's
And
my that is my example, but when you go from a road that has 20 cars a day on it to then 2 weeks before you increase it to 100 cars a day, and then 2 days of the event, you've got 400 cars a day up and down the road.
Well, or you don't have,
Well, I think when
adequate
they start
parking and
posting,
everybody's parking on the
flyers
road.
out and saying, hey, we're gonna be doing this, that maybe there might be some, residents in that area say, hey, maybe we might need some, and then contact Public Works.
So the counterpoint to that event would be like K-Rocks. They have several events out there with 250 rigs, 500 people, and I've never seen any issue with traffic.
I don't think I've ever seen any problems or any
Yeah.
issues of.
And the hotels are all full out here. And
Well, they are, and then, I mean, it is, but just to be able to protect your people that live on these roads, if you had something.
I think
just to
that's
be
a
able
case
to-
by case.
If you
Really
had
case
it
by
though where
case.
you had an event, then the resident would be able to go, hey, it's in here, can you provide zoning? Can you provide some dust control, because this is what we got, don't care if you have it, have fun. Just provide some dust control and traffic management while you're here,
To be
please.
honest, that ought to be on the promoter anyway, if he cares about the people that's coming there. If he cares about, I understand what you're saying too, because I've been on both sides. Because we've got an ambulance hit 2 or 3 times because of the dust going out there. But that's beside the point. The promoter should be concerned, or have enough concern about his participants and the people that's coming out there to come to you guys or say, hey, this is what we're doing, when we're doing it. Can you help me out with dust control, or can you help me out with?
Well, most people aren't even gonna think about that,
Yeah.
really at that time, but, that would be something that would be, try to keep them, if there was an event like that, yeah. I mean, really realistically, if a promoter come to the board now and said, hey, we're gonna do this, that'd be the last thing that's in my mind, but maybe we ought to have some type of list that says, well, but, they're gonna come and ask for security through the sheriff's office, or, a lot of times it's not unknown that this is gonna happen. But I
No,
don't
it's,
think-
it's not, but it would be nice to be able, that way the landowners there could say, he doesn't have to call dispatch to get him to come out and slow down, or he doesn't have to call you in order to
Right.
get Eric to bring a water truck out. It's already set, you gotta provide security, you gotta provide dust control for the people that live here, and boom, you're done. It's over.
I say let's just leave that off entirely on our recommendations. That's something that the,
Yeah, I don't
Planning
think that's
commission.
a zoning. I think that's
Worry
more of a
about-
planning.
I had just put it on there because everybody talked about it last week.
Yeah, we did talk.
Sounded like we
What
wanted
if
it.
we put something in there about, that's like, like I have items that may need consideration, and we just put temporary events, should be encouraged, but further investigation is needed on how to proceed with that, I don't know.
I like that.
So maybe maybe more or less it's what I have listed, and then we just put further investigation is required for.
It'd be
Yeah.
great if the planning commission will investigate it.
Yeah.
That's where I'm.
Yeah.
No, I totally can see the point.
I've been on both sides, and as a promoter and as the other side, out there too.
Guy standing out the road going like this as they go flying by at 65 mile an hour.
That's when you accidentally dump some dirt in the road and make you some speed bumps.
Usually just park my truck in the middle of the road, and that way I can mow the road ditch in peace and not get rocked.
Or just sit
A lot of
sit on,
birds flew out in my neighborhood, let me tell you.
sit on the side of the road with a handful of rocks.
Yeah.
Did you? I saw this.
I don't encourage that.
I mean,
What
don't
else?
don't do that
That's
in the
all.
dark. Don't pay a kid.
What else, Mary?
What else, people?
All right, where were we at?
I like the part that Brian has regarding costs and the need to make sure you do it right.
Yeah, it was a specific concern that was voiced several times. I forgot about it.
Kinda like building a house. If it was done a long time ago, it would have been a lot cheaper.
Right. Well, I think that I didn't know how to put this in here. Maybe but I think that it's, well, I kind of worded it that that we need to engage with a reputable planning firm with experience to help mitigate the costs now. But I think at least my perspective is there's going to be an initial cost. We shouldn't shy away. We shouldn't make it cheap, because that will,
Yeah.
the costs of not doing it right the first time are substantial.
Yep, exactly, agree. Yeah, you don't wanna go with the cheapest bid here.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely want to have somebody that's a professional, a lawyer that's
Done it
that
before,
does it.
and everybody's.
I had a conversation with Nick Graham today about the setbacks, and his comment was that, that's something that the planning commission needs to spend a lot of time on with an experienced zoning lawyer, and really needs to nail that down in a way that makes sense for everybody.
That article that you sent was, I thought, really apropos to this situation. Too bad we didn't investigate it.
Yeah, no, the article I think had a lot of good points. It was really long and very, very thorough. I wish we had more time to discuss point by point on a lot of that stuff was really good. I think some of it I didn't necessarily agree with, but it had a lot of really good points for sure. I mean, not that I didn't agree. I think some of it didn't necessarily apply. They had a lot of deforesting stuff, and I don't think that they're going to see a lot of that. I think these solar companies are going to want to put this stuff up as cheaply as possible in areas where they're not going to have to cut trees down and whatnot.
I agree with that, but there was a big part about erosion control and all that, which I think is incredibly important, because you are changing the fabric of the ground.
Well, one of the recommendations is, could we put in here, recommend that the commission read that and study that letter?
I was actually thinking at the end of our letter, we supply them with resources that we found beneficial for their use.
Yeah,
That's a good
I think
idea.
putting a link on the bottom is perfectly acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
And
good.
then just for reference, speaking of time, as with the developments that occurred on Monday, we'll probably delay recommendations to the board until we're back to 3.
Okay.
So that's probably gonna be towards the end of this month. So if you guys want additional, meeting times, we could probably, see that be approved next week, but, I mean, if you want, if not, I mean, you guys can get your recommendation put together.
I was gonna say, I appreciate that. I think we should see, let's see kind of how we get, and I think that we're getting really close to what we
I
can.
think
This is probably gonna be the 23rd or 30th before we swear in the Republican Party's gonna meet on the 12th, so I would assume that by the time it gets to the governor, after they make their selection and then approved, it'll probably be that either that meeting on the 23rd or the 30th that, 'cause I wouldn't want you guys to do recommendations to a two-person panel. That is, two-person board, that's, it's better to have all 3 of us.
Sure.
Yeah,
I think we've got a good start, and if we keep having meetings, I mean, not that we don't need meetings, but the meetings we need to have needs to be months long,
Well, I know you guys have done a lot.
to move to the
Yeah, you
second
did
level.
Yeah.
In my, this is the first level, we're kind of at a plateau. The second level just needs to be.
Handled by the planning commission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So maybe the best way to keep is, do we want to just go down this letter and then strike out stuff and or add stuff, and then
yeah, I think that'd be the good thing to do.
Okay. So let's just, sorry, Mary, I'm jumping at.
No, you go ahead.
Do, so, let's say we stopped, we kind of jumped around, but then, is everybody good? Or do we want to somehow, so we talked about the recommendation, adding in some parts,
This paragraph from Jason.
just, yeah, adding that in, and then, so when and if there's a proposed land use change that fits the definitions of C1 or I1, the landowner will be required to submit project for approval to the zoning commission. I think, it makes sense to include or to make recommendations on what we think should be required in that submittal? Because I think, Jason, you had something,
Jason
and
had
Mary had
something.
stuff in here as well.
As far as
Some things that should be required as part of the submittal.
for changing the zoning.
Yeah, or for a conditional use.
Oh, so I didn't have anything as far as changing the zoning, is conditional use requirements, which that's something I was just thinking we probably need to. I didn't see anything about conditional use anywhere on yours.
This is we kind of talked about this a little bit, but the difference between a conditional use permit and changing your zoning, is there a reason that we would want one versus the other?
I think you need both, because there are cases where you're still agricultural land, but you're using part of the land for, industrial, so it would be a conditional use. You can use this conditionally, and then if you wanted to rezone, it's a bigger process. I think it's not just getting approval for a conditional use.
Yeah, but would they overstep their bounds on the conditional use?
I mean, if you meet the conditions of the use, that's the thing. Conditional use would be anywhere that's not classic industry, So if you do have industrial uses in an agricultural area, it would be a conditional use.
So, as an example, all the solar things going in, to me, that's changing the use of that land. That's no longer agricultural land, that's now industrial land, so that would be a zoning change, not a conditional use.
But if you rezone industrial, that means they can do anything they want with it. It's not just one case use.
Okay.
That's where a conditional use comes in. You're saying for this one specific use, you're okay to do it here. If you rezone industrial, they can do anything industrial they want on that property.
Okay, agreed.
Except if you still have a conditional use that says if your use is bigger than this or more polluting than that or whatever the definition of industrial is, they would still have to have it. But there would be a lot more, I would think. It does open it up a lot more.
Yeah,
It's
so
a
if you
rezone.
rezone industrial, you're
Then, yeah, okay, fair.
it's-
So we should gear more towards conditional use permits than rezoning industrial. Well, I mean,
there's case uses for both.
Both,
Like
yeah.
if you want to put, to me, it's more if you're doing something that's completely non-reversible. Like if you're gonna open mine strip hit something, that would be, you probably need to convert over to industrial use rather than just a conditional use, because the land's forever changed. You're never going to be able to farm that. It's not agricultural. It's industrial, and it will always be industrial. Whereas, yes, solar panels are semi-permanent and change the land, but that's why you have decommissioning, so that it can be decommissioned, so that it can that's why you have decommissioning plans that you submit as part of your
I hate to break it to
conditional
you,
use.
Jason, but mines have decommissioning plans that
They
are
do.
much stricter than
They do.
solar.
But I'm not saying that they don't have decommissioning plans. They do, but we're in southeast Kansas. How many dumps, from mines are around that didn't get reclaimed? Now they didn't. They had different laws back then, and they're going back and reclaiming a lot of that. But it's still, yeah.
Yeah, you have to compare 2000 to 1960.
Sure.
okay, I think so we just need to, I think we need to be in mine does not include conditional, I did not put conditional use in here just as an oversight, but, so we should definitely adjust the language to make sure that, it has.
That you're talking about
Talk,
conditional use.
both, yeah.
You need both. Yeah,
You need
there
both,
are
yeah.
100% cases where conditional use, because it's one condition, not do whatever you want with it. That's industrial.
Yeah. Okay, so we need to. So I guess it'd be for both either conditional use permits and or zoning changes, we would require basically, I think Mary, you have it.
Yeah,
Mary's got good one at the bottom.
Yeah, so we should add something to that. So we need to add this paragraph in.
I like what Jason has in his also. I don't know if you can go through Jason's and Mary's both.
Yeah. You're talking about the last paragraph on the first.
On Jason's first page, last paragraph, what Jason has, and of course Mary's last paragraph on the back side.
So,
Yeah, there's a lot of things, more research I think that needs to be done into these, into the special use conditions, or the not special use, the conditional use conditions. So I have a problem with really getting too specific on a lot of those. I think that some of them do need to be called out, but like, just as an example, number 12 in Mary's specific example about the lithium ferrophosphate batteries, the LFP batteries. Yes, you're right that lithium ion phosphate batteries are less reactive than other lithium ion batteries, but lithium ion phosphate batteries are a type of lithium ion battery. So the wording behind that would have to be changed, but the problem I have is right now there are any number, probably 8 or 10 battery technologies that are being worked on right now to replace LFP. So I hate to codify that, say you can only use this battery type when they actually get to building these things, that lithium ion phosphate batteries might not even be lithium ion.
Yeah.
Iron phosphate batteries might even be the thing. So in my first paragraph on my second page, I talked about all applicable NFPA standards are required to be followed, and there are NFPA, National Fire Protection Agency, standards for battery storage systems that get updated as things change. And it's like for industrial machinery, you know, I'm an automation engineer, so for industrial machinery, I follow NFPA 79. So everything I do, the wire size, the wire colors, it's all controlled by, I use NFPA 79 to design my machine because I'm following the National Fire Protection Agency's standards. So having something like that, and then the next paragraph or sentence I have talking about any BESS installation should require emergency plan and equipment appropriate for the chemistry and size of the installation. That's saying that it doesn't matter what you put in here, you need to be able to control it if there's a fire, and you need to make sure that, because technology changes so fast, if you put something specific like LFP batteries and the standard changes, then you're already behind the 8 ball, versus this is saying any installation that you're going to have, you need to be able to handle a fire for that installation.
Yeah.
And I think they need to have their own fire suppression system built into those.
Most of them will have to anyway, probably meet codes.
To meet NFPA 79,
Yeah.
you have to buy the standards. Sometimes somebody posts part of them. I didn't want to have to buy the standard for that specifically to go through, but I'm sure they have a lot of specific standards for specific installations, battery types and whatnot.
I wonder if it's as simple as adding like when we start to talk about, when we get more into the weeds on it, we just, maybe we just say something about investigation into current current codes or
Current standard.
His standards is what you need, is follow the standard that he had for that. I mean, that would,
Problem is the technology changed, the standard may change. So
Yeah.
saying NFPA standards, all applicable NFPA standards, that's an umbrella that will apply to anything that they install, because there's going to be a National Fire Protection Agency standard for any battery installation, period. Any electrical systems, they're going to have NFPA standards. So I think that's a good umbrella for them to include in any of their documentation if they wanted to kind of cover that.
yeah, because I'm thinking broader, because we're talking specific to solar panels or battery storage systems or whatever. But if there's another industrial use that comes in, we're going to have to, or the planning committee or whatever is going to have some code reference to, like, this is, if you do this, then you're going to need to follow these codes.
So the way I worded it, all applicable NFPA standards are required to be followed in any conditional use case. So maybe it's, so National Fire Protection Agency is one set of standards
Yeah.
for fire protection.
Yeah.
So maybe it's all NFPA and OSHA. I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, those are the two biggest standards I follow. I have to follow at work. I have to follow OSHA standards. I have to follow NFPA standards.
Right, but then there's, like, depending on it, there's building code, like there's a building code standard that I think you'd want on an industrial scale to make sure the building is being built adequately.
What about?
That's going to be OSHA.
What if we put all federal and state standards,
So I think,
appropriate federal and state standards?
I think we need to put something in that they need to do research and find out what standards apply to the conditional uses and make sure that those are enshrined in their conditional use for whatever condition they're applying. So if they're going to have conditional use for solar, they need to do some research and get with somebody who knows what standards they're going to apply, and they need to make sure that they include those in the conditional use requirements so that somebody can't come in and circumvent, National Fire Protection Agency or whatever settings for that.
Yeah, and we have to follow NFPA 99 at work because in the healthcare arena, that standard is applicable because that's what the NFPA requires for those, and it goes into stuff like fire breaks, doors, wiring, smoke compartments, like everything. NFPA is a pretty comprehensive set of guidelines, and then there's also something like the Code of Federal Regulations, which I have to deal with a lot of work, but that would be a good backdrop as well as far as the regulatory background.
Your conditional uses are going to be pretty specific, like solar or wind or something like that. So,
And I imagine there would be like an NFPA standard for something like that. NFPA seems to be a good umbrella regulatory background to use. That's very thorough. They will get updated. Like with the new battery technologies that Jason mentioned, sodium-ion batteries are something that's being heavily researched right now because it is superior than when you compare it to lithium-ion batteries. And if we limit to just lithium iron phosphate batteries, that's very constrictive.
it's a right thought process. It's just technology moves so fast you can't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I work with those batteries. I design automated systems with LFP batteries. So yeah, and the sodium batteries, yes, they are working on making them superior. They're definitely cheaper, and they're working on getting the energy density. That's the problem with the LFP batteries. They just don't have the energy density.
Yeah.
But it makes them safer. But don't want to get too much in the weeds there. But yeah, we just pointing to specific standards, or not specific, pointing to they should look at standards rather than try to specifically make something like a battery type in a conditional use, because that stuff changes so much.
That, it's kind of the same logic that we've used on what is industry and, okay, so we'll just have to figure out, work through the language, and maybe that's enough for now, is just to say, use
Yeah.
hit that paragraph close enough, and maybe we can adjust it a little bit as needed. Does, so the one thing, I think for the most part, I think we, so besides those two things, is there more in, Jason, is there more in yours that is not included in this?
I mean, the no building, my last paragraph, you included, the no building codes should be implemented in residential.
The zoning needs to be able to daylight future land uses. I don't have anything that words it that way, but maybe that's, but I have something kind of, I think about personal property rights in there, how,
Yeah, I talked a lot about, yeah, you do have the paragraph on personal property rights, so.
this includes protection for the rights of neighbors. Maybe we insert in something about the daylighting of future land uses. I think, so I'm skipping around, but so are we good up until that? So we'll include some language about conditional use permits and zoning requirements based on the paragraphs that you had, Jason, as well as what Mary had in hers. I think she had the special use, conditional use permit. Oh, Mary, you had something in here about parcel divided into 3 or more separate lots, new street creation, common driveway stuff.
That was just if they wanted to get into anything like subdivisions.
I think it's probably something that they should look at. Maybe something to think about adding in. Oh, the other thing that I don't have, I know that I don't have in here, is what you have in here about ideas to define industrial and commercial. Specifically, I think my note was, oh, I might have pulled it out of this one, so so I think we should add in something like you have, some recommendations for how to define industrial and commercial. I had, maybe I'm skipping over, I know I had at some point written something about that it needs to be forward thinking and not like reactive.
Yeah, not specific industry, but
Yeah. So do we wanna go through that list that you have and see if there's anything that we maybe take issue with?
Where are we at?
Sorry, we're,
On Mary's page.
we're on,
backside.
let's see, if you go to mine, we're kinda halfway down that first page. So we're kind of slotting stuff in there.
Yeah,
And we're looking at,
I was lost on
oh,
Mary.
sorry, we're looking
Or wherever we was at.
at, this,
Okay.
sorry. Oh, the other thing that we should put it maybe in the personal property rights is something about grandfathered businesses.
I don't think we have to, because that's enshrined in the state legislature. So
Okay.
the state statutes say that anything is, that is currently is already, that's part of their requirements on the state level.
There are two types of grandfathering, those that can be phased out if you make any kind of change to what your business is doing. If you build another building on the place, whoop, you're not grandfathered anymore. And then there's those that are more following the business.
So we should,
And I think we should be a little more specific about that.
yeah,
And I
that's,
had a paragraph somewhere here
You-
that says that,
yeah, I think it's your second, your
Third
third thing,
paragraph.
but yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it doesn't have to be as long, a lot of that's just explanation, so that as we were discussing, we understand what I'm trying to say there.
So, I think that could live under the comments about personal property rights. We could throw something in there about our recommendation for grandfathering items.
I don't know if I like necessarily saying for as long as it exists in the same location, regardless of expansion and size. So if somebody comes and buys out a mom and pop shop and they want to turn it into a full-blown industrial something or other,
Somebody had something in there, if it changed, then it would have to be redone. Maybe Brian had that.
well, the way the state statutes reads is that it's for all buildings that are for the business are grandfathered in. If a building is destroyed, they can rebuild the same size, but if they want to rebuild, upgrade, they would have to get a conditional use. So I don't necessarily agree with that if they want to upgrade a little bit, but I don't like the word expansion regardless of expansion and size, because that could mean a lot, again, some big industrial outfit or a commercial outfit comes and buys a mom and pop store and then puts up whatever they want because they're grandfathered in. And that's, in my opinion, outside of the intent of what we're doing here, because we don't want those outside influences to have unfettered control, even though the business they bought was grandfathered in, regardless of expansion and size.
Well, how about if you change that to, regardless of whether they expand, to unless any changes fall under what is defined as a conditional use.
So basically what we're looking for is like a triggering mechanism that would say this goes beyond the scope
Something
of.
extraordinary happened and now you should have a conditional use instead of being grandfathered.
Yeah.
I think we should say you should consider expanding the grandfathering away from any change to allow a few changes of some changes if the business punt the ball into their court. So rather than making it absolute like this, say we suggest that you consider looking at the grandfathering in and include some measures to allow them to reasonable expansion for a business that was grandfathered in and not just nothing without rezoning.
What about like a fundamental change in the nature of the business?
That's here, so
Well, this grandfather on this one here kind of says
I agree
same
with what
thing
you're,
we're talking about.
yeah, I think this
What's been
is,
said.
for the most part, I agree. Your note about the regardless of expansion and size, so maybe that's,
Unless
You
there's
just- You
significant,
could just strike out that part and leave
Yeah.
it as, unless the character of the business changes.
yeah.
unless
The character, yeah, and
unless there's significant scope or character change of the business or something along those lines. Just tweak that wording is
Yeah.
the only thing I have
Yeah.
a problem with.
yeah, okay.
I mean, I think that we're on the same page. I just think that wording needs to be tweaked a little.
Yeah, so I wonder, the track that you're on, I think, if we had it triggered by over, where we were kind of going with this, if you're expanding over a footprint of whatever square footage or something like that, then it would trigger more use. So then, do we have, okay, so we're, so,
I mean, I like the idea of having the list, but I don't like the idea of defining exactly what those numbers are. So I'd rather see if footprint exceeds determined amount size.
Yeah, they
If
need to be-
noise
yes.
level exceeds determined, to be determined,
yes, I agree.
Yeah, and that's not meant to be all inclusive, it's just
Yeah.
A talking
examples.
Yeah.
And I think adding another sentence at the bottom of that saying, the goal of this is to support local business, encourage local business, keep local business. We don't want to affect local business. Small local business or medium local business,
Yeah.
whatever you want to word. So just hit that even harder.
Yeah.
The more you say it, the more we want to drive that home, that this is all for, to support small local business, and we don't want to discourage or dissuade or, cause any harm to small local business.
See, the only one that the storage of machinery, equipment, parts, that one I'm not quite sure about, but and then the investment over, well, I guess that's in specific, so if it's like an investment over, I don't know what that, we probably just need to figure out what that determined amount is. And I think the chemical thing probably needs to be, that we need to add some I guess agriculture is automatically excluded from that, so it doesn't matter. I can just see a bunch of farmers that have,
They still have to meet EPA stuff, these
Yeah.
guys that buy chemical to spray their fields, they have to have a chemical license in order to have it, they have to, they can only get so much, it's just, that's rules and regs set up by them, so.
yeah. Okay. So basically, we'll include this list, but just take off the specifics.
Yep.
Is that, everybody agree? Cool. All right, so Mary, did we get it through all of your
I think we did.
things?
Jim, on that, I do have, like, on the business investment, you did this for 30, 40 years. And I guess what is the definition of that? Is there, from 300,000 to 500,000?
I looked and looked, I couldn't find a good.
Good
definition
number
of
to
industrial or
determine that.
commercial.
I think,
Because 300,000 in today's dollar isn't much.
well, that's exactly where I was going.
It's nothing.
Somebody builds a shop on their property, I mean, you could easily exceed that.
Real
depending on
quick.
what you put in it, so, yeah.
Jersey cow milking.
That's exempt.
You're right.
Yeah, and they probably even give you a tax credit for putting up that barn.
I wish we need to, I need to get better about that. Okay, so then do we want to move into kind of our findings and how, and then what our recommendations based on those findings and how we can address it? And like I said, I'm not tied to any of this, I just was throwing thoughts down on how to organize it. But I do think it's important that we note all the sum of kind of what we heard at the meetings and personal conversations.
Talking about your last 4 bullet points on the back.
Well, so the personal property rights one, starting there and then kind of working our way down.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of strong. I'd say the personal property rights was the number 2 thing we heard about, besides the need to zone in the meetings. So, and personal liberties. I hit a lot on personal liberties, even include the definition.
Yeah.
I think, I know this is a landmine to step on.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, this is the whole difficulty when you come to the zoning and the conversation and everything that goes with it is, how do you balance not trampling on personal property rights and liberties versus protecting your neighbors from what you're putting on your land? And the solar panels is the whole catalyst of this conversation and everything that's gone on. So the struggle that the planning commission has is, how do they balance the setbacks, the screening and all that in a way that makes people be able to not be upset about what their neighbors have going on, but it doesn't prevent landowners from utilizing their land, because that's one of my biggest concerns is I get the point behind the setbacks of a certain distance and not wanting to have the glare of the solar panels, not wanting to see them like in your view, but also I don't want to say to a landowner, hey, you have to have a 500-foot setback because your neighbor doesn't like how your solar panels look, and that's 500 foot times how many ever wide your property is that you can't monetize, and that may make you lose your land because you can't make enough money on your land, you know. So how do we? I mean, they're going to be acutely aware of that struggle.
Did you buy it for agriculture investment, or did you buy it for an investment of something else?
I mean, to me, it's the same thing,
Yeah.
because whether you're using for agriculture or farming it for solar, you're turning sunlight into energy. It's just one way is more accepted than another. And one way is more common than another. You're modifying land in agricultural use. You're modifying the land in solar panel use. One is more socially accepted than the other. Again, it's their property.
Yeah, I think not to, like, I don't think, I
don't think we have to get specifics. I
think that there's sorry, finish your thought.
How do we communicate to them that that's going to be the hardest part of what they have to look forward to discussing? Because I think that that's something that we should bring up. This is what we heard from people. A lot of people are concerned about the solar panels and not wanting to look at them the rest of their lives. On the other side of that, we have people who have signed contracts that are landowners that don't want their rights trampled. How do we communicate to them that that's the biggest opposing two arguments that we heard in all these meetings?
Be a
I think they're
neighbor.
gonna know that.
Yeah, so
They're gonna know it.
I put something in here about environmental/property value, because that was something we heard about. And what I put was, we should incorporate an environmental we should require an environmental study of some sort. I keep saying we, that's.
They.
And then, I put reasonable setback requirements need to be a standard so that it's clear for everybody. I don't know what those, I don't think anybody here knows what they are. I think that there's like Mary had I don't know about the specifics, but I think the idea of like 300, I don't want to get into the weeds this much, but like 300 feet from a house could
It's
be
different than
most
300
house.
feet from the center of the gravel road that it
Right, and I
borders.
think that-
And actually, it needs to be 316, because I think a gravel road is 32 foot wide, so you share half the road. So
Right, I
it's
think
300.
that there could be. We're diving in the weeds, and maybe we
We
can
are.
have this off. We can
Yeah.
have this later, this conversation later. But I think it could be something as simple as like, for a certain distance in front of the house. I don't know what that would be. The offset is greater than it would be normally. And Mary, you kind of alluded to that, in I think one of your things. But
Yeah, I put greater setbacks if they're covered on more than one side or two sides.
Setbacks.
If they have
Yeah.
all the way around your house, you have a little bit larger setback than if you just have it across the street.
I guess my question is, I didn't mean to interrupt, sorry. My question is, how do we acknowledge that in our recommendation so that, do we acknowledge it? Do we say, is there
I
something
think
we
you
can
need
say?
to.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe we put another bullet point here or add on to this one about reasonable setbacks and just. Man, I had a train of thought and I lost what it would be, how to word it. But
One of my thoughts was setbacks appropriate for location.
Well, that would, I mean, that's the
You know,
discretion
that's-
of whatever, that's a.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's just that's just a,
That's-
And at the end
Right,
of the day, the planning
that's,
group is gonna
yeah, and
have
that's,
to make those kind of decisions.
have to make those kind of decisions, yeah, but that's the thing, if you're a landowner and you've been there 60 years on this same piece of property, you pulled out your driveway for 60 years, and it's always been this way, you've been made your life investment in these piece of property, and so you've got to look out that guy that's been there and he's paid property tax on his house and his real estate for 60 years, 70 years, 80 years. And you got to look at him. And I understand the guy that owns it across the road, he don't live there. And maybe he just come in here from wherever and bought this. And, but still, you got to look out for your guy that's been your bread and butter for 60 years.
yeah, and that's why I put something in here about this. Personal property rights also should include the protection of the rights of the neighbors and the community as a whole. And like that's a very like blah statement, but it kind of I thought it kind of summed up the issues that we're running into. It's not just that's the crux of the whole thing, right? Is it's how do you
Yes, protect them both.
navigate that? Nobody's going to be happy with it,
No.
but you have to find that.
Right.
that
And they ain't gonna be happy with the guy that defined it either.
Yeah.
Certainly not. No, I.
So my last sentence in my bottom paragraph of my first page, it is of the utmost importance to implement a balanced and fair resolution that fully considers the property owner's rights while protecting adjacent property owners from safety concerns, property encroachment, and loss of property value, while also providing reasonable visual screening.
Yeah.
That thing that I sent on Kansas bill, whatever, Senate bill that they had, where Jason said it didn't get passed, of course, but they had talked about a setback distance, and then they also said, okay, if the adjoining landowner agrees, they can shorten that distance up.
I don't disagree with that sentiment. If,
I don't either.
If your neighbor wants to agree that's
Yeah,
a good idea to reduce your setback if you can make nice with your neighbor and they want to agree to that. Yeah, I like that.
absolutely, and I agree with that 100% too. If you guys can get together and you're still friends in the end, then fine.
Yeah.
I just don't want to go without acknowledging one of the biggest fights that they're going to have without saying something about we think this is going to be important, but it's going to be difficult, and and it's important that you spend a lot of time and effort and consideration on this specifically.
Do we just put it that it's critical that setback requirements are researched or
Maybe something like setback requirements shall not result in a situation to where 100% of the county or whatever would not be able to utilize solar. or would not be able to have a solar development on their property. I mean, at the end of the day, the people who signed up for these solar developments are doing so willingly. It's not like somebody is going out there and holding a knife to their throat saying, you have to sign up for this. It's a choice that they are making that is going to be profitable for them. And yes, it is important that we take into consideration the rights of the neighbors, but at the same time, it's not right to tell people or to implement setbacks that are so prohibitive that that nobody in the county can have a solar development. Like that 2,000-foot setback, that is ludicrous. I mean, you would have to have so much land that you would own a good percentage of the county. Like that just does not make sense. So having some kind of a stipulation or something that indicates, okay, yeah, you can have a setback, but it shall not be so unreasonable that no one can have a solar development.
Yeah, I think the way I worded it was as it can't be oppressive as to oppress your neighbor's personal liberty, which liberty is the right from oppression and restrictions imposed by authority.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I mean, the only reason I brought it up is I just don't want it to go unacknowledged. That is going to be their biggest battle, is balancing that with, from what we heard, from what we heard and what we know, people want to try to minimize solar as much as possible. And also what we heard is property owners want to have their property right. So that's going to be the biggest balance that they have to fight to yeah.
Did everybody read my number 8? Actually, if you read what I wrote in there, and these numbers aren't like set in stone or anything, they're examples, but none of these numbers that I have in here exceed what one of the current contracts in the county are for setbacks. But it scales it. There's 2 options that are given here. One option scales it to how much surrounding your property solar is there. Because it seems reasonable that if it's across the street only, you don't need as big a setback. If you've got it around, if your parcel's in the middle of a full section, for example, and you just have 10 acres carved out of that, so you're fully surrounded, I think it's reasonable to think that you'd have a little bit larger setback. But all of these are within what is already.
The contracts were 300 feet from an occupied
Well, that's not
residence.
exactly right, because the contract for Nextera is 300 feet, but the contract, and this is part of the reason why I think we need this, the contract for Doral is 400 feet, right? Yes,
It's 400 feet from occupied building or from property line?
from residents.
From occupied building, from occupied residence. Okay. Now, I don't disagree with,
And then there's an alternative option that again still does not exceed, but if they want to do a full thing, and there's also options that say that they can make an agreement with the landowner to reduce those setbacks.
I don't think that the setbacks that you have here sound unreasonable. I fully think that the numbers you have here are reasonable sounding. My problem is, I don't think that I have the legal ability to say that with definitive enough certainty to suggest it, given that I think that that's something that a lawyer needs to be involved in the conversation on.
With the numbers.
Could we put them in
Yes,
there as
absolutely.
Well,
examples?
again,
that's what I was-
that's what I'm saying, this is an example, the numbers, they're not set
This
in
is what's
stone,
been
I'm
in
just
pre-
saying.
this is what's
that
in the
As
contracts
long as
right
you're
now.
doing something that's reasonable, and if they're already in the contracts, how can you say it's not reasonable?
Yeah, I don't disagree that what's in the contracts and what's here, it seems reasonable. I think that we could say that without providing specific without providing this type of
And
example,
we can
saying.
change them to blanks.
Right, I'm not saying that I have a problem with the distances. What I'm saying is setbacks should be thoroughly considered and reviewed with current contracts that are there, with current standards that are in other counties within the state, within acceptable and reasonable accordance to the law. I think if we said something like that, that's just us saying you need to do your due diligence to consider setbacks, instead of giving examples of what setbacks could look like.
So I think, so we can adjust the language and how that's worded there, or add to it, or add another bullet point that says something about thoroughly investigation. And then my other thought was, I think that the premise that you have for this is very sound. So I wonder if we don't include, since we're gonna include other, like I didn't get into specifics on like this. I do think that some of this stuff is definitely worth acknowledging, or like, I don't know if you would include it as like an addendum or something, and say, hey, look, here's some things that we discussed. The decommissioning agreements and things like that, and like, here's some food for thought. Here's a baseline of some conversations that we've had.
I'm perfectly fine with not having all of that type of detail in the recommendation, but I would like to see an addendum that offers a few examples of what other counties have done. I've got a list here of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different counties that I looked up on what their setbacks and different structures were, that I wouldn't mind just passing along to them so that they have it. I know they have that big book, but
Well, no, I think that's totally, I think that that's the sort of information
that
we
sort of
would
thing,
include.
just as a
Yeah, I don't disagree
extra
with
little
that.
something so that, because, I mean, there are a few counties out there that do for example, the various setbacks depending on how much of your property is surrounded by solar, but most of them do not. And it's just because I don't think anybody thinks about that sort of thing. You know, they look at, well, this other county has done this, we'll do the same thing.
No, I don't have a problem
And
with
so
any
it's
of
just to
these.
help open their minds a little bit into looking at different ways that they can achieve something that makes it more tolerable for non-participants, while it still isn't really limiting that much on the lessers.
I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, from what I've seen here and what I've seen in the contracts, I don't have a problem with anything that you have listed in this number 8 from today. When I get into issues, it's when you start talking about 500, 700 feet from property lines, that's a lot. Now, 400 feet from residents, I don't think that's unreasonable. And like you said, it's in the one contract. I think I looked at a couple of the contracts. I might not have looked at the third one that had the 400 feet. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe I just looked at the one and it was 300 feet from the residents. But I guess 300 feet from property line or 400 feet from residents, whichever is greater.
The resident's going to define the mailbox at the road, or the placement
house.
Occupied
of the
residence.
house
It
of
would
the
be the
property.
house.
Occupied.
Because the mailbox would be the property line. If you are-
So that would be the mailbox would be your residence, because that's where your mail goes to. This is the residence.
No, the occupied residence. The occupied residence. The residence
The
you
structure.
occupy, the structure. Where you actually are living. Where you're actually going to be looking out the windows. Where you're going to spend 75% of your time at home. I mean, less for other people, but you know.
I do like number 9, the coniferous trees and deciduous trees.
Yeah, visual
That's-
barriers.
Yeah, I like that.
No, I agree with it. I mean, I think that like codifying what they had in the agreements, but adjusting the numbers, I think they had a lot of good things in the agreement. The first agreement I read was the 301, where they had the 2 rows of conifers, and you know, a lot of those things. That needs to be set in stone and agreed on, and the numbers need to be adjusted, and but a lot of like 12-foot fences, they have 12-foot fences. I would think a 12-foot fence would be a little excessive personally. I mean, who's gonna climb over a 12-foot fence? Who's gonna climb over an 8-foot fence?
A lot of them, they're in there with razor wire, or not razor wire, but they're a
Barbed wire.
security fence, just like a cell phone tower.
I think that that's more my assumption. I read at least one of the contracts. I won't, but I think that that's more driven by liability from them. than-
Their insurance and everything else, you know.
Right, they don't want kids to go in there and start
Yeah.
hitting things with baseball bats and all that other stuff, or somebody go in there and get hurt.
Yeah.
And the size is kind of contingent upon the size of the structures that are within it. They're trying to make sure that the fence is taller than the structures
Sure.
type thing.
Yeah, I just thought 12-foot fence was that. That's a heck of a fence.
So the one that I went to, I think I've mentioned this a couple times. But the one I went to, I wish I had a picture of like what I signed to go in there, but it was basically like I signed my life away.
And honestly, I was gonna try to get away from work today. Isn't there like a small solar installation out at Devon?
125th and Range right
And
in the corner.
I wanted to get just my perspective on it, and honestly, that's something that I would maybe put in a recommendation, that they go somewhere and get a perspective on before they make any decision on what it actually looks like in the field. You know, what is a 50-foot setback with conifers?
I don't even think there's 50-foot setback on
No,
that
no,
one. It's
it's
right up
right on-
against,
it's-
it's right on the road, right on the
Right.
corner.
But what is the sound level there? You know,
It's
is
down low. I don't know, there was foxtail growing
Is
underneath
it-
of it about that tall.
is it right next to? Is that right next to a substation?
Yeah,
Right across the road.
substations have it.
So the substation's going to be humming pretty good.
See, that's just a mile,
regardless.
it's 2 miles
It's a
south of Casey
3/4 of a
Rocks.
megawatt.
Yeah, it's a
10
pretty.
acre plot.
Yeah, it's pretty small.
And the sound that you're gonna get is, you can't compare even looking at that.
Or
to
running
what
down
we're
the
talking
Greenbush.
in
How
these
big is the
places.
Greenbush installation? Running down the Humboldt. How big is the Humboldt?
Humboldt's
installation?
the biggest one around by far.
So that would be
Butler.
some.
Butler's the biggest that I know of. Is Butler bigger than
I don't
Humboldt?
think it is. How big is
I
the
didn't
Butler
think
one?
Butler
Maybe
was
it's
that
been a
big.
while since I've gone past Butler.
It looks huge to me,
You're
but
talking about the little one that's just off the highway?
the north one, the one that they
north?
run the city with, yeah.
Yeah, that's not that big.
I mean, to me, I like to have context before I even discuss a lot of these setback numbers. And I like to have
But isn't that
physical
the plan?
context.
Yeah, I agree with you. In the effort to get out of here at a reasonable time.
Yeah, sorry, we get
No,
into
no,
these.
I don't. Do we? I guess how do we want to? We kind of started going through the notes on findings. Do we want to continue that, or does everybody just want to take it and see if they have issue with it?
I would say, why don't you rewrite your letter of form with the adjustments that we talked about, not including any of the specifics, like the solar specific things, and we just put an extra addendum to it about, while we were researching, these are certain things that you might want to think about, you know, alternative ways for setbacks,
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
this or that, or, you know,
And I don't think it.
include what we found from other counties, or the link to the,
Yeah,
that thing, or
yeah.
whatever, just as a separate little addendum.
Do we want to have another quick meeting maybe next week to final form and approve and vote on the final form?
I would say yes, if we're not presenting it Monday, we should just have a meeting next Wednesday, or whatever works for people.
I won't be here next Wednesday, but that doesn't.
We got a couple Wednesdays. I mean, we could do the
Yeah,
Wednesday
I
after
mean-
that.
And if
That's-
it's a different day,
Yeah, or a different day. Just, I mean, it would be a real quick meeting just to
Go over what you had.
and finalize everything.
Like I said, if it works for everybody to meet next Wednesday, I don't know that if we're, you know, if we're going through this, basically this letter and adding the stuff to it, you already know my thoughts on it, so I don't know that I need to, if that's
Just
what
say
works
it,
for everybody.
email it out. And
That was kind of my thought, make the adjustments, email it out, see if anybody takes issue with it, and then I can
Yeah, we can dial in too. We can throw it on a phone or whatever while you're here. We've got a conference phone if you're available by phone.
Yeah. I'll probably be driving, but yeah, so that's fine.
If you're available by phone, Mary's got your phone number, whatever. We could do that while you're driving, and then you're part of the. You're here.
Sure.
So what was the date that you thought you'd have somebody in place? Roughly.
Did you find anybody?
Well, they're gonna take applications on the 12th,
Yeah, they put up a
or
deal
read
on
them
it.
on the 12th.
You can find somebody.
So I'm, that, once they make their approval from old District 1 people, then it will
That's a
have to
big
go
district.
before the governor to sign. And then, with Commissioner Milburn, it was a couple of weeks. Sometimes that process could take longer.
Yeah.
I'm anticipating probably by the end of the month, we will have our third.
We've got 2 weeks for sure to work with.
Yeah.
Why don't we play it by ear and see where we're at, and then we could schedule a meeting over email for.
We'll have to get David to.
Is that
Yeah, we'll
is that
need to
acceptable?
know ahead. We'll have to publish the
Yeah.
meeting notice. Which, I mean, as long as we decide something a couple of days prior to the meeting.
Yeah, Susan can send it out. It's no big deal.
Is that's acceptable to play? That was gonna be my recommendation too. I just didn't know what we were.
I just don't want to make final approvals without a vote. I don't,
Yeah,
I don't know
okay.
what official business over email. Type of situation.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
read what he's got rewrote would be great.
Yeah,
And
no, we do need to have a meeting
And we gotta have a meeting together.
to formally approve our recommendations.
Maybe we can just.
Can we do this? Can we tentatively schedule for next Wednesday? Just kind of see where everybody is, and and either I can call in or.
Will you have time to make the edits and everything by Wednesday? Is that pushing you too much?
No, I think so.
Probably types 100 words a minute. He'll be done tonight.
I gotta rely on my wife to do that. She's way faster at typing, and a more gifted writer for sure.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that I think I can.
Or do we want to?
Yeah, I'm not trying to push it. I just don't want to also let it just kind of linger out there.
Yeah.
Any days free. We'll make it.
Yeah, my schedule's a mess right now anyway. The kids are in all sorts of activities. Been running back and forth, back around 4 times a day this week.
Yeah, I'm glad those days are over.
Softball games keep getting canceled. Golf camp got canceled. The rain is crazy.
So is that where we ended up with tentatively scheduling next Wednesday and seeing how we fall, and then if not, we'll push it to a week. Is that, or do we just want to?
That's okay with me. If everybody,
I'm good with
any
it.
other conflicts with next Wednesday, that's the 11th.
I
What
move that
time?
we have another meeting to finalize our recommendation next Wednesday at 6 p.m.
I may have a conflict, but I can probably call in. I have a meeting that's probably going to be every night next week at 6 p.m. Which is
Well, then you just want to push it another. I mean, do we want to
Yeah,
push
what
it
about the
another?
following week?
Wednesday or Thursday. You got every night next week. You say at 6.
yeah.
And you can, 5:30 hurries everybody probably.
I'm fine with either Wednesday. So if we want to say 2 weeks, gives us more time.
19, yeah.
I mean, we can talk about addendums, or items they can suggest an addendum.
We can do just do one, especially if you email out what you got and we go, hey, yeah, that's good. No, make this change, give you a little bit to make the change, and then be one and done.
So his motion, I second it, but his motion.
Can I retract my motion and I'll modify it? Or do we have to vote it down now? Because I moved to have a meeting next week.
So we're gonna say Wednesday, the 18th at 6,
So not next week.
not next week.
2 weeks.
So you modified your,
I modified my motion to two weeks.
I'll second that one.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move we adjourn.
Seconded.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye. I got two more hands.